Hi everybody, my name is Anne. Welcome back to Art on the Creek. We're in my home studio in Parker, Colorado, and I have recently given a review on the Renaissance watercolors out of Poland. They're still on my palette, and I've got these new brushes. You guys, I really like these. They're by Da Vinci. They are the Colaneo series. They're completely vegan, 100% synthetic fiber. So if that's something that matters to you and you're looking to step up just a little bit from something like a Princeton Snap, not that you would need to leave those because they're still some of my favorite brushes. But what I thought we could do today is use these Colaneos, which I am loving. They're just that little step up, like I was saying, from the Princeton Snap. They're just a little bit more responsive, more control. I just think these, I love the handles for one. I think these are just some of a really, really neat brush. Sorry, I got distracted there because I was looking at at the handle as I'm doing the voiceover. I love the gray stain on the wood, and the beveled edge around right where you hold it is just so comfortable. Really nice. So the colors that we're going to be using today, originally I thought for this painting of a stack of sea glass, what we could do is go ahead and open the Winsor Newton Cotman watercolors. And if you have those, or if you have anything else at all, please go ahead and use those. But I have these paints that are still on my palette from the Renaissance watercolors from Poland, like I was telling you about. These are the Intense line, which are in tubes. And this is a very limited palette. It's magenta, a phthalo blue, a transparent yellow, and this helio turquoise. Now, because I squirted out a little too much of the helio turquoise and this reference photo that I found here, let me put it up for you. Now, we do not have sea glass here in Colorado. We have a lot of lakes, but no sea glass. I think this is kind of strictly an ocean phenomenon because I think it has to be salt water. Don't quote me. I'm not familiar with sea glass. I just know that it's beautiful. I was really stricken by the colors in this photo of sea glass in particular. Now, I just think that this palette really lended well toward it. And you could, the beauty of having a limited palette, and this one is what's known as a CMY palette plus turquoise. And it's not technically cerulean, but you know, a phthalo blue in this shade is really quite a good one for this. Anything that you can have a primary palette. Now the CMY is the one that is used by printers. It's cyan, magenta, and yellow. And those are the inks that you buy for your home printer. So that's why that probably sounds familiar. And then if you ever see the letters CMYK, the K stands for black. Now in this set, you will be able to mix your own black. I got these from Etsy. Renaissance watercolors are from Poland, and they are not distributed in the United States. There is one place where you can get them, and that is through an Etsy shop, and I will link to her shop, April Mathis of A Little Creative Me. She didn't sponsor me for this video. I purchased these paints with my own money, and I've got a review of them. I can put a little link to that right up here in the corner in case you're interested in seeing that. I think it just aired a week or two ago, so you might enjoy seeing that before you try and paint this this particular painting. So what we have here is this pile of sea glass right on a rocky shore, a rocky beach, looking out over the sunset or maybe sunrise of an ocean. And I really like the way the reflection worked with the water. I liked how in the photo that the light shone through the glass. And I really like how that sun reflected on the tops of some of the rocks. So that's what we're going to try and accomplish here today. Now, when you're mixing with a CMY palette, you can kind of see the palette, it's half off frame there, but what I'm mixing is just kind of a dark grayish brown. If you play with your ratios and mix all of those colors together, you can come up with a beautiful range of tans and browns that you can use for things like sand on a beach. You can use them for complexions, many different values of skin tones. There's so much you can do with a basic primary or a CMY palette. So if you have some watercolors that you really, really love that are beautifully transparent, that's the one, that's the set. Those are the watercolors that I recommend that you use for painting something like sea glass, because what you want is that transparency. And typically you're going to be in luck because watercolor in general tends to be transparent. But if you're choosing your pigments, if you're selecting a primary palette to do this, I would choose colors that are transparent. This particular one turned out really well. I liked working with these paints. I think I made 3 paintings with this little set, which is fun for me. I kind of just went went bonkers one day and just kept trying to use up this palette because that helio turquoise, I can't lie, that is probably my favorite color of the bunch. When I was a child, my favorite color was always magenta, and this one is really, really nice. It's a very good magenta, but that turquoise, wow, it just really made me want to get away, go to the tropics, and perhaps that's why I love these watercolors so much, because as professional watercolors go, I will tell you they are very nice. They truly are very nice, and the price point is really lovely if you're trying to get into some professional paints. But there are some limitations to them. I don't think that's a negative. I really don't. I think it's the characteristic of these paints. And I think that it's intentional. This company, the paint that is in the pan versus the paint that's amongst the tubes, it's not the same formula, and it may not always be the same pigment. So there is some, what I would call inconsistencies, but it might very well be intentional. It was kind of hard to find a whole lot of information about it, but all I can tell you is this, that working with April Mathis on her Etsy shop is a pleasure. Everything about these paints was fun to use. I really enjoyed them very much on this bamboo watercolor paper. This is a Hahnemühle paper. They have so many different papers in their line. They've got an agave. I think that one might be mixed media. This bamboo is also mixed media, but they're very, very good for water media. They also have a Harmony. They've got 100% cotton. They're I'm drawing a blank. They have their 100% cotton sketchbooks. Plus, they also have their line that is in pads that is 100% cotton, and I can picture it, but I for some reason the word is escaping me, so I'll put it on text here up on the bottom, with apologies to Hahnemühle, because I am loving all of your papers. So thank you for being such a good company when it comes to producing paper. I wanted to tell you how to approach something like this when you're dealing with a very low light source and you really kind of want to accentuate the light. So the way that I chose to do it was to go in first with a very light wash of these colors, and I want to put that sun in first as a reminder to you guys as learning how to do this, but also as a reminder to myself. Sometimes I do get carried away, and I have a tendency to forget things because I get too mired in the detail. For instance, when I'm working on one of these rocks, I would maybe decide, ooh, look at that cool little crack it has there on the left, that little fissure. I really want to make sure and get that in, and I want to highlight that. And my brain kind of just goes off on a tangent of its own and forgets to remember where the light source is sometimes. Usually I can catch it and fix it, but I wanted to go ahead and put that light source in first as a reminder to you, because when I was very beginning with watercolor, that was the first thing I did, was I would put up some physical representation of my light source if it were not visible on the paper that I was painting. For instance, if it wasn't a sunset or a sunbeam, I would put a water cup off to the side or my coffee mug and think, okay, that's my light source. That's where things are coming from. You know, some kind of object, a spray bottle, a soda can, anything to help you remember that that's your light source. So that's why we wanted to go ahead and paint the sun in first. I also kind of wanted to work top down, back to front in this one, and it just kind of fell naturally that that light source should go there. When you're working with a light source like this one, where you've got a lot of humidity in the air, if you get your entire paper wet first, which is what we did here today, then when you fill in the yellow for the sun in this case, it will disperse beyond your circle and make that nice soft edge and kind of just meld in with the atmosphere. Another thing I want to tell you about atmospheric painting when you are working with landscape skies, the color is always darker toward the top, unless you're dealing with a sunset. There's all kinds of exceptions with sunsets, but when you're dealing with a sky that is blue, a typical daytime sky, before it's gone to that pink purpley sunsetty, realm, your color of blue will be darker at the top and lighter as it gets to the horizon, and that's just the way it is. And it's funny because once you start to paint more and more, you will listen to all of these YouTube artists such as myself give you these great tips and tell you how we got there and all of these things. And then you will find one day that while you're out walking or while you're out driving, you'll notice, hey, that's what Anne was talking about. I can see that the sky is more blue at the top than it is at the bottom. And if I were to paint that, I would do X, Y, Z. That's when you know that it's kind of sinking in. So maybe by the end of this video, you guys could have some epiphanies. I don't know. I'm not saying that this is epiphany worthy. All I'm saying is I really hope that by watching my tutorials and others, that you're actually learning, that you're spending your time valuably. And you know, if you just like to watch these to relax, you know what? That is fine too, because there is nothing better than relaxation and self-care, and watching people paint certainly is a way to do that. So please don't feel compelled that this is only for people learning how to do it. You can certainly watch and just enjoy. Everyone is always welcome in my Art on the Creek studio, and I am genuinely grateful that you've tuned in today. In fact, if you really enjoy tutorials like this and you're interested in just upping your game just a little bit further, I do have memberships that I offer on my channel, and there will be a link in the description below that will explain the different tiers of membership and the benefits that are there for you. So if that's something that interests you, please check that out. It's just like Patreon, except for it's right here on YouTube, and you will get a notice when you set that notification bell that it is time for you to check out your member content. I've also got a newsletter that I send out to my Pikes Peak members, and I do art supply shares for my members as well. Right below this video in the description, you can find more information about that if that interests you at all. Getting back to our painting today, we are working on adding the shadows in the waves, along the beach, and in the rocks themselves. Now you notice we went in with that first wash of very light, a light consistency, a very thin consistency of paint. This is the beauty of watercolor. When you're working with transparent paints, any kind of layering that you do, you'll be able to see that layer underneath it as long as you paint over top of it when it's dry and very carefully. Now, there are a lot of different ways to do this, and you know, you can use watercolors that are semi-transparent, semi-opaque, staining, semi-staining, things like this, that you'll find all kinds of information about watercolors when you really start to get to reading the tubes. But this particular technique, I did a lot of what's called wet on dry, and that's where we leave the first layer alone to dry, and then we come back in with a new layer to glaze over it. And that's a wonderful way to create a very subtle shadow. If I had gone in with a heavier concentration of paint, I could create a darker shadow. But with this particular paper, this bamboo paper, it just works so easily with just about every technique. And I was able to use it, I think, to its fullest advantage. In that I could do wet on wet, I could do wet on dry, wet on damp, and you know there's many papers you can use that will work with whatever your style of painting is. I've just found that I really like this bamboo by Hahnemühle, and no one is sponsoring me for this video, by the way. I've purchased all the supplies you see here with my own money. Now I've mixed a darker tan, and you notice I've kind of got a lot more purple going on in there. Purple is such a good shadow color, and what we're doing is we're creating contrast between that yellow, that warm yellow of the sun, and then that cool purple of the shadows. And I'm just putting the purple shadows of the rocks on the side that's closest to us as viewers, because the sun is shining on the other side of these rocks. So you'll see I'll go in with varying shades of blues, grays, purples, and the way that I mix that gray, brown, tan, the way that I mix that kind of in general dark shade is to simply mix all three colors plus some of that turquoise in some cases. So whenever you are playing with your paints, I highly recommend that you have a separate palette like this. And this is just an appetizer tray, actually. It's a white ceramic tray. You can use a tile from the hardware store. Anything that's white ceramic, I think, is the best and easiest palette to use, because you'll be able to really see through that translucent watercolor to how the color will look to your eye once it's on the paper. Now that's true even if you're using a toned paper. I definitely recommend that white ceramic palette because number one, it's very easy to clean up, very easy to mix. You can re-wet the palette and use it again and again. And if you have a big plate like this, you know, there aren't a lot of nooks and crannies to get involved in and worry about, you know, having to clean a big sticky mess. What I'm doing right now is lifting off, and what this technique is when you take a brush, get it wet, and blot off the excess water, and then I'm just painting on top of the surface that's already dry with water. So you can see I'm just kind of agitating that pigment, which really what that does is it reactivates it. And then I'll come in with my left hand and a paper towel and kind of blot that off. So you can see this creates a beautifully soft, subtle, nice, smoothly edged highlight. And it works very well on things like portraits, animal noses, some rock faces, plants. In this case, these rocks are very smooth, so it worked very well. Anytime the light is muted and you want to have a very subtle change in a gradient of color, this technique, this lifting off technique for adding highlights works very, very well. I like using it a lot on plant leaves also to just either show the veins or highlight the way that the light is shining through the leaf. Because these are the things that we can do with watercolor. We can definitely paint things that are in fact see-through, because watercolor itself is see-through. Now that's not to say you cannot use this reference photo to paint in oils or gouache or acrylic. You know, there's so many different things that you can do, which is about any medium. You could do this in pastels and it would be quite lovely. But for our intents and purposes today, of course, we're going to be working with watercolor. So whenever you're doing anything, when you're painting anything that has a shadow cast. Now, in this particular picture, it's kind of tricky because that light is coming through the rocks, but yet we know, our brains look at this picture and we can see, okay, those rocks are sitting on top of each other. And because we know that there's gravity and we know that there's a light source, we are going to be able to see some shadows. Now, given the angle of the sun and the time of day and the rocks in question, the sea glass, the shadows are not going to be that intense. But this is where we have an opportunity as an artist to impart those shadows in such a way that will help us convey our message. So what I wanted to do with this painting here was to highlight the best features of these paints, which is, I think, honestly, their translucency. And with this sea glass, I was able to impart that the message that these rocks are translucent, that we can see through them. But there are shadows. We need to marry these together. So let's focus on that now for this next step here. We're going to keep the light to the right-hand side where the sun is. We're going to keep that light on that right-hand side. So remember, we don't just want to kind of underline each rock, rather. All of our elements need to be connected yet separate. So for instance, on this rock here that has the pink in it, you'll notice I started that line of pigment up at the top, which is just touching the rock above it. And then I swirled it down to the bottom, and I'm focusing more of that pigment over here on the left. I'm just kind of letting it play and lightly go around with the tip of my brush. I'm leaving some space in between. And now I will do the same thing on this blue rock underneath here, kind of following the way that the shadows form on the natural shape of the rock, really allowing that watercolor to work for me. And what I'm doing is I'm leaving some space exposed, because that will in turn create a natural highlight, and it will allow that first layer of pigment to really show through without anything on top of it. So we're just going to deepen that blue a little bit and go around the left lower edge of this rock. Remember, our shadows work opposite the light source and with gravity. So we always want to remember to put our shadows in the right places and just to give them just enough nuance so that they also impart a little bit of color of the item that's casting that shadow. There's only very few exceptions where you will deal with really intense shadows, and that's where you have an extremely bright light source. And you know, if that's the style that you paint all the time, well then of course you're going to be doing that a whole lot more often than I do. But in this particular reference photo, where we're dealing with a light that's very muted, very filtered, atmospheric, we will need to soften those shadows as well. If I were to go in and make a really bright contrasting shadow, it would just kind of jar the eye and would make it just not look right. So that's something we want to remember about all of the elements, including the shadows in our paintings, is that we need to keep things consistent with the message we want to convey. So if I were to go in with a much harsher shadow, it would convey a very different time of day than where that sun is sitting. So just kind of, these are things that you may not even be aware of in your mind consciously, but you'll know it if it comes out incorrectly on your painting. And I'm going to say that word incorrectly with a huge asterisk, because I don't want you guys to beat yourselves up. If you feel like you didn't quite do something right, or it's just not turning out, just set your paintbrush down and walk away. It's really probably that you're just too immersed in it, and the painting is really still going to be just fine. You just need to walk away for a minute. Another thing that I found to be helpful when you get in that space is to take a picture of it and then edit it on your phone or your camera, however you take your photos, to black and white, because sometimes it's your values that are off. So just a couple of really good tips to keep you going. Give yourself some rest walk away from your painting, look at it upside down, look at it across the room, squint at it, or take that black and white photo and take a look at it, because all of these things are tools that we have very much at the ready. We can always take a break. We can use our phones to take a photo, and we can definitely squint at something from a distance. And that will really help us as artists decide if we have our values right and if we've got everything laid out correctly in the way that we want things to be laid out. This particular photo is kind of interesting because it's kind of front and center with that tower of sea glass there. I liked that there was enough clutter at the bottom in the rocks that I could pick out a few. You'll notice I did not include all of the rocks. And you certainly don't have to include every single rock. You can look at a painting, reference photo rather, that's really quite complicated and has an awful lot of detail. But what is it that you mainly notice? Start there. If you want to take some detail out of a reference photo and just kind of pare it down to the message you want to convey, what is the first thing you see in that photo? Let's say it's an animal. Well, is the animal sitting amongst a field of very detailed flowers? Maybe you could just paint the animal and then drop in color wet on wet for the background to represent the flowers. You don't need to be completely detailed if you don't want to be. And that is my goal here, is to show you different ways to interpret reference photos or the images that you've got on your phone and that you really want to paint someday. The other thing that's really fun about this particular tower of sea glass is that since those rocks are translucent, the sun will shine through the rocks and then cast some of its light onto the other rocks that are on the ground. So this painting like this is also a really good opportunity for you to impart some of these other colors in different places in your painting. And that is such a great way to create harmony in your painting. Another very important element in art. To create a harmonious painting, you really want to repeat those colors. That yellow in the sun, for instance, is repeated in the yellow in the rock. It's got the yellow rock on top, the one kind of in the middle, and then of course the yellow light shining on the rocks on the lower right here, as well as right here in this portion where I'm going to just kind of dance that yellow across all of the rocks to just give each of them a little bit of a touch of warmth that would naturally be absorbed by the sun. We may not be able to say, oh, look, all of those rocks have a yellow cast to them. But by going over that with a very thin glaze, we can definitely know that that sunshine is touching every element in our painting. Now that our painting is dry, we can definitely take a look at it, and we can see that we really need to punch up some of these shadows. So we'll go ahead and do that. Now, once again, I've mixed up some of the darker grays that emerge from mixing all three of these colors. And I'm going to go ahead, first of all, and really create a place where all of these rocks are kind of resting on top of the other rock. And then that will be a nice translucent layer to go over the colored layers of shadows that I put in with the previous wash. And now this glaze can be that more defined shadow, but I'm using a very soft gray because I didn't want to go in there with a really harsh, dark line, because then it would just look kind of outlined. And I'm definitely taking this gray up into the rock a little bit so that it marries that shadow. So once you can play with these placement of shadows and figure out the best way to highlight and create the shadows in your work. Sorry, I got tongue-tied there for a second. Once you figure out the best way for you to do that, and it's only done by practice. That's all this is just practice, practice, practice. You will find out what you like, what works, and once you complete a painting and you can sit back and look at it and say, hey, I did that, and you know what? I had fun, and I learned so much. I learned about shadows. I learned about creating light, how the light can touch things and create bounced back shadows of light. There's so many different kinds of reflections, whether reflections and shadows that occur in life that our brains filter out for us daily, and we just end up taking it for granted. That's what makes art so challenging, is being able to replicate really everything you see, but maybe not in 100% detail. That's just the way that my personal view of art is. And if you watch my channel at all, that's what you're going to get, of course, naturally, is my interpretation, my artistic interpretation of the world, which is to very much give things an illustrative bent. And that is the style that I like, and that's what you will end up learning here on my channel. Now we're getting into the home stretch, and I thought, I think what this needs is a little bit of water on the shore. And this is where I'm really taking some artistic license because water is rarely just blue. I mean, it is off on the horizon, of course, and the sky is blue because of atmospheric reasons. And that is probably true of the weight of the water. I don't really know the science behind it, but I wanted to add some more of this blue that's mixed with the helio turquoise and the magenta, which gives us a nice, beautiful blue. Just kind of a mid-level blue. I wanted to put that as added shadow in amongst these rocks that are surrounding the tower. So that's what we're doing now. We're just adding a little bit more blue, just kind of getting more shadows in the ocean, around the rocks. Just really kind of go around your painting at this point and just do whatever touch-ups you think are necessary. One thing I do want to mention is the pencil lines in this piece. Now, I did leave them fairly dark because I wanted you guys to be able to see what I had drawn. I happen to appreciate the pencil lines in a work of watercolor. If that's something that really drives you nuts, then you can certainly lightly erase things before you begin painting. In fact, in the description below, I will include my pencil drawing for you. I've got a PDF link to that. It's through Dropbox, and that will be there for you in case you just wanted to trace this and not draw it. So after we've got those darker shadows in, now we'll go back and make sure that we have all of the highlights in that we need. And once again, we're just using a lifting off technique to take care of those because I just am loving how soft they make everything. I felt like as I was painting this that I was able to feel the rocks, and I'm one of those people, I really like rocks anyway. And I really like to be able to impart a lot of that texture. And with these paints and this paper, I just felt like it was a really nice combo to be able to express the smooth texture of these rocks that had washed ashore. So continually looking at your painting, making sure that you've got everything highlighted and shadowed just the way you want it, and then you can give it a final dry and call it good. No matter where you are, please remember to sign and date your work. This will probably live in my journal, but this is a memory to myself of what I did today with you guys here on my channel. I hope everyone has a wonderful creative week, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye now.